Hi and welcome to Study Room. I am Pratyaksha, your history teacher, and today we'll be discussing the third chapter of history, the making of a global world. In this chapter, we'll be learning about the concepts that made the world interconnected via trade, interconnected via capital, interconnected via discovery and invention of, for example, say new agricultural methods. All right, and about how the Industrial Revolution shaped the connectivity of the whole world, and we'll be learning all this by keeping in mind England, because the colonization of England, the imperialism done by England, that it helped and it kind of catapulted the whole concept of a global world, the interconnectivity of a global world. So let's get started with the chapter. In the pre-Morton world, what happened that especially as early as 3000 BC, Indus Valley civilizations traded with present-day West Asia. So the concept of trade was not something new that was introduced to people via Englishmen. The concept of trade, it existed as early as the 3000 BC, and also in the Indus Valley civilizations, the earliest civilizations of the Asian land, of the Indian land, right? And it started with the trade of these cowries, these seashells. Means whatever products that was going on in exchange was done via the exchange of this cowries or these seashells. Later on, when the world expanded, later on when advancement technology it grew up, okay, so what happened that priests, travelers, tradesmen, all right, they all started wandering from places to places because they understood that their trade could not be carried out from one localized area. So they traveled, they wandered from one place to another in order to sell their goods, all right, or in order to say buy cheap raw materials so that they can later on build more products of their own and sell them in high prices. Okay, so all of this resulted in the concept of trade, and it was not just about trade, it was also about the expansion, about the connectivity, right? So if you talk about priests, if you talk about missionaries, okay, so the spread of faith, the spread of say the Christian faith or the spread of Muslim faith, that did not happen by just preaching in their own homeland, right? If you remember the spread of Buddhism that started in the ancient Indian land, so it did not just happen in India, right? It had to be spread from one place to another. So this whole concept of spreading, this whole concept of spreading, not just trade, not just faith, but also economy, but also interconnectivity, right? The export and the import of food materials, the export and import of textiles. All right. So whatever you wear, whatever products you are using, some of them are of course made in India, but most of them, they have been, the raw materials at least, they have been imported from various other places, and the products are further processed here in India, and that's how you get to use them. All right. So this concept of trade, this concept of basically traveling, wandering from one place to another across countries, okay, in order to spread this connectivity, right? That existed, that has been in extant as early as the 3000 BC. Okay. Then later on, during the 15th century, something known as the Silk Route that emerged. What I mean by the Silk Route here is that silk cargoes from China, okay, and you can easily remember the spices. India was mostly famous for its spices, right? Then food products such as potatoes, maize, okay, from the Americas. Let me explain you what I'm writing here. What I mean by the Silk Routes link in the world is that when England started discovering, and when England started annexing its empire, started conquering various other territories in order to expand its empire, it discovered new places. It discovered new places in the east, such as you have China, you have India, and you have other Asian countries. All right, and in the west you have the Americas, the North America and the South America. So what happened during this the discovery of the Silk Route, that a lot of various products were being discovered. Okay, products such as silk cargoes were being imported from China, products such as spices were being imported from India, products such as potatoes, maize, tomatoes, chilies were being imported from the Americas. All right, and like I had told you, the faith of Christianism, the faith of Islam, that was also on the spread, right, via Christian missionaries, via Muslim preachers. So the extent of the connectivity around the world regarding all these things, regarding trade, regarding faith, okay, and regarding business, you can say in short, this was thriving in the world till almost the 15th century. Okay, so the discovery of this Silk Route, the discovery of this way via land, or this route via, you can say, seas, that helped the Englishmen travel, that helped the Englishmen conquer new lands in order to expand their business, or in order to say pick up humans or livestock for the laborers or for their own benefit. Okay, that was thriving in the world via this Silk Route link around the world. Okay, and of course it was initiated by England. All right. Then spaghetti and potato. Like I told you, when Christopher Columbus he discovered the Americas, means both North and South Americas. So that helped the Englishmen in order to import various food products such as potatoes, such as tomatoes, such as maize. Okay, and it has been argued whether the Chinese food that you get, it has been argued whether that had been imported from China or from the western side. All right, so this was on the go. All of this was on the go. The various people were discovering new food items that they were growing, say, in their own homeland, or also from the different countrysides such as from the western sides, the Americas, and eastern sides, India, China, and other Asian countries. So many of our common foods, they were introduced in Europe and Asia after the discovery of all these lands. All right, here you can see here in this picture, and merchants from Venice and the Orient trade goods. It is believed that Arab traders introduced pasta to Sicily in the 5th century. So the discovery of all these new food items, spaghetti, potato, tomatoes, maize, pasta, it was not prevalent all around the world. Okay, it was being introduced from one place to another. So this period that we are reading about, this was the beginning when this interconnectivity was initiated, when this interconnectivity started happening. Okay. The Irish potato famine. With the introduction of potatoes in Ireland, the poor peasants, since potato is it's a very cheap crop, and people can grow it people used to grow it very conveniently, and they did not used to invest a lot of money on this. All right, so it was a very friendly crop for the poor peasants, especially in the countryside of Ireland. So during the mid 1840s, when the potato crop that was damaged by a disease, so a potato famine happened, because most of the farmers, most of the peasants of Ireland, they were dependent solely on potato. So when the potatoes got harmed, okay, what happened? A famine occurred and people starved, and ultimately almost 1 million people in Ireland, they died. Okay, so this was the consequence of the Irish potato famine during the mid 1840s. Conquest, disease, and trade. All right, so after discovery of food, after discovery of exotic spices, exotic textiles such as silk and everything, all right, now people were in search of precious metals. Okay, precious metals such as silver, such as gold. All right, so when the silver and gold mines in Peru and Mexico, it enhanced Europe's wealth in the 16th century. So this basically initiated a chain where people started not just discovering new food items or new textile items, means items or goods worthy of being imported or exported to expand the economy, but also they were on the lookout for precious metals such as silver and gold, so that they can further expand their economy, further expand their trade via the exchange of these precious metals. So remember those cowrie shells, right? Those seashells. All right. So they were the most cheapest items that people then used to that you then used in order to trade, right? So now that was being replaced by more precious and precious metals as the population expanded and as the economy started growing. So many expeditions, they set off in search of the El Dorado, the mystical city of gold, especially in the southern America. All right, so the Raleigh's El Dorado expedition 1595, all of this was happening during the 16th century, because during the 16th century, population was increasing. People were starting advancing with reading new books, with the the development of various technologies, not just in the advancement of medicine, but also in the advancement of agriculture, also in the advancement of industry. All right. So all of this started a certain conquest. All of this started a certain trade. And when people did not have, when people could not conquer, especially of England. Remember, England dominated about 25% of the world. All right. So when England could not dominate an area on the basis of subjugation, on the basis of forcing, imperialism of some kind, then they also did not, they did not shy behind in obliterating that livelihood, obliterating that peaceful livelihood in those colonized land. They did not shy away from introducing certain disease, means certain germs, certain viruses that they knew could harm them. And once they were at the vulnerable stage, they could then go and exploit them. They could then go and colonize them, and then they could flourish and propagate with their trade, propagate with the conquest, and propagate with the discovery of precious metals and other goods and items that we have been talking about. Okay. So the Portuguese and the Spanish conquest of America, it was based on introduction of disease. All right. So especially in the North America, the Native Americans, they did not have strong immunity power. They were not exposed to viruses, germs, bacteria, certain diseases such as smallpox. All right. So the Portuguese and the Spanish people, the Europeans, what they did was they introduced smallpox to the land of Americas, so that the population could then die, population could be then vulnerable at its weakest. And then at that point, they could come in, they could exploit, they could conquest, and they can propagate on with their trade. All right. So this was especially during the mid 16th century, means in the mid 1500s. All right. They introduced smallpox that killed and decimated the whole population, the whole communities of the Native Americans. Okay. Then it was not just limited to exploitation of resources. Rather, it also got extended to exploitation of human beings as well. All right. So during the plantation and slave trade, especially in the 18th century, what happened that in Africa, you know that people in Africa, owing to their geographical area, owing to where they belong, they have different build. They have different anatomy than what people have, say, here in Asia, or what people have there in America or Europe. So people in Africa, they are dark skinned, they are more broad, they are more tall. All right. And some of the earlier obsolete scientific declarations, they also said that they were very closer to their primal instincts, means to closer to being a gorilla. All right. This is very defamatory. But this is important for you in order to understand that why people in Africa, they were being colonized. All right. So owing to their texture of their skin, owing to their racial complexion, owing to their anatomical build, okay, they were being exploited. They were being kidnapped. They were being forced in order to give up their way of livelihood. Their way of livelihood means how they used to organize themselves in farms, or how they used to propagate on with their agriculture, with their land systems and everything. So they were basically forced to give up everything, and then they were taken up as cheap laborers, or sometimes just slaves, because hence the name slave trade. And then they were being exported, they were being transported to various countries in America, in Europe, and other areas, especially in America and European markets. So there, the plantation, the you must have heard of the sugarcane plantation. All right, there they were forced to work. Okay, they were forced to work day and night without giving any wages to them. So they were basically slaves. They were basically laborers. All right, unpaid laborers. So you can see here in this picture, there was a very stark racial discrimination. All right, and by the 18th century, this slave trade was on its height, and slowly and gradually we learned that how America was able to, build a separate economy for itself so that it could withstand the European colonization. All right. So with that, when America got its own, you can say, growth, okay, especially during the 18th century, it propagated on with the slave trade via exporting lots of Africans in America, all right, for their plantation services and for other kinds of services, for growing cotton, for growing sugar, etc. All right. Explain what we mean when we say that the world shrank in the 1500s. So when we say that the world shrank in the 1500s, or you can say in the 16th century, so we have just learned about the Silk Route that was being discovered in the 15th and 16th centuries, right? This meant that the world that was so diverse, the world that was so, you can say, distant, the people, they were so distant. Now they were coming closer and closer. How? Because people, especially Englishmen, they started discovering land. All right. So when they started discovering land, both say in the eastern side, the Asian side, or both in the western side, the Americas. All right. So with the discovery of eastern land, with the discovery of western land, they also started learning about various resources such as food, resources such as you can say textiles. All right, precious metals, okay, that were being used for trade. All right, so it was not just about food, it was also about other resources. And people, they were discovering land, they were conquering, they were not just discovering, but they were also conquering. All right, so what this meant was that people could now go from one place to another, means from one part of the world to another easily. How and why? Because they had now discovered land, and they had not just discovered land, but they had also started conquering land, means they had also started owning those population, owning those lands, and owning whatever resources that they used to get from that area. All right, so this helped, you can say, travel. Okay, this boosted the travel, this boosted, you can say, the communication. All right, and so whatever disparate areas were there in the world, they were now coming closer. Okay, they were coming closer, and hence we can say that the world shrank in the 1500s. So now we have learned about the introduction of this global world, and now we will be learning about how this introduction expanded. Okay, how this introduction expanded from the Silk Route that we had learned that was going on in the 16th century, and how with the you can say the explosion of industrial growth, of agricultural growth, and also of labor, how people started expanding, how people started becoming closer and closer to this global power via learning about the 19th century. So let's get started. There are three types of flows within international economic exchanges that you have to remember. So there is this flow of trade, there is flow of labor, and there is this flow of capital. Now, you have been learning about these all three little, okay, but I'll be here explaining you more. The flow of trade is what we have seen when we were learning about resources, right? Remember, during the introduction part, I told you that people not just discovered food, new different crops, but they also discovered materials such as textiles. They also discovered materials such as metals that were being used for the production of various and the manufacture of various convenient articles, but also precious metals such as gold, such as silver, right? So this flow of trade is dedicated to that. Then there is flow of labor. So remember about the plantation and the slave trade that I was talking about, where cheap African labor was being exported. All right. So this flow of labor is about the African labor, or you can say it is about the indentured labor that we'll be discussing in detail in one of the parts of the chapter. Okay. So this cheap labor, or you can say the indentured labor, where people were forced to give up their land, where people were forced to give up the kind of livelihood that they were living on in their land, and then they were forced to move, they were forced to travel from the other part of the world in order to do something for the rich people, all right. And they did not used to get anything in return. They were basically slaves. So slave trade was there, and in the indentured labor, they were very poorly waged, extremely poorly waged. Okay, so this was what was happening when you say that flow of labor was on the go. Then the flow of capital is, you can easily translate it to as the flow of revenue, about the economy, that how the money was being circulated, all right, about the imports and the exports, about the different tariffs or the different taxes that were being imposed on certain imports in order to you can say save, or in order to, yeah, in order to say what was about the local business that was going on. So if say England was importing something from India, then they could not do it in a very free hand, because then that would hamper the localized England trade that was going on. So they imposed a certain amount of tax, they imposed a certain amount of tariff when they imported certain products, so that the local trade in England could not be hampered. All right, so here we have three types of flows that basically dependent, and that basically helped shape to shape the global world that we are learning about. Okay, now abolition of corn laws allowed food to be imported at lower cost. So there was something known as corn laws. Now I told you, right, that Britain used to import certain goods from certain places, right? So Britain started importing corn, okay, from India, because corn was very cheap, and people wanted cheap food because the population was expanding. All right, so when England started importing this corn, so this what was this rendering? This was rendering this product corn to be very, very cheap, and people, all of the population, they now started they now started to get dependent on this corn. Okay, so this hampered the local food business that was already there in England. All right, so then certain tariff or certain taxes, okay, that was then imposed on this corn that was being imported, and this law that propelled this tariff to be executed on these imports was known as corn laws. All right, but this of course this was meant to uplift the richer people. But say if you are getting something in cheap, but now you have to pay taxes for that, now you have to pay extra money, you have to pay extra tariff for that, so obviously it is going to be heavy on your pocket. All right, so what you will do, if say you can buy something for 5 rupees, but now the tariff makes it to almost double its price, say 10, so you will revolt against it, right? You will revolt against the withdrawal of this extra money that you have to give for no reason at all. So people started protesting. All right, the population started protesting because they could not afford to give this heavy prices. All right, then this corn law was abolished. Okay, so when this corn law was abolished, that again rendered this product corn to be very, very cheap. Okay, then people started buying this cheap product, this cheap import. Okay, but what this then rendered to the local farmers that were there, the local British agriculturists. Okay, because people were not buying their products, because people had now been deviated to buy the cheaper corn, so these rendered the British agriculturists as unemployed. Okay, so then they started migrating overseas. Why? In search of work, because their own products was now rendered cheap. So now I'm sorry, expensive, because the other product, the imported product, was cheap. They started migrating to other places in order to look for jobs, and nearly 50 million people migrated from Europe to America in search of work. Okay. By the 1890s, agricultural economy had become global. So this, what we have been seeing, this business of import and export via this flow of trade, okay, that had resulted in the 19th century. It was on its culmination, that, and by the 1890s, agricultural economy, it had become global. So this business of import and export of food products from one part of the world to the other had now become possible, had now become fully established. Okay, and between 1820 to 1914, world trade multiplied 25 to 40 times, 60% of which comprised agricultural and minerals like coal. So you can see here, whenever people used to come across a new land, there were two types of things that was, of course, very new. Of course, there were people, but if you talk about just the land resources, okay, so what you're getting from the land resources, you're getting food, all right, you're getting food and you're getting minerals, okay. So people were on the search, in the search of these important exotic food resources. So then it was obviously it was dependent on agriculture, and people were in the lookout for important minerals, minerals that they could not excavate from their own lands. All right. So this rendered that between 1820 to 1914, the world trade it multiplied to 25 from 25 to 40 times, in which 60% comprised of these precious land resources, our food resources, or you can say that was solely dependent on the agriculture department, and the other exotic other important material, which is the minerals, such as coal, such as precious metals, such as, you can even say, common metals like aluminium, like bauxite, etc. Okay. Then a similar migration pattern was seen on smaller scale in Punjab when the British government built canal colonies, a system of irrigation. So you know that during the in the area of Punjab, the geographical area of Punjab, there is a flow of there is a chain of rivers, right? 7 rivers. Okay, so in this area of Punjab, in order to use the water of those rivers for the irrigation purpose, for the purpose of agriculture, a similar migration pattern was seen. So the British government, what they did, they started building canal colonies. They started using these channels of water in order to be flown across farmlands, so that their trade, whatever trade they were aiming to build, whatever trade route, whatever farm products they were aiming to build, that could be propagated. All right. So sort of a colonies was built in the Punjab area, and then that became a system of irrigation. Okay. Now, there is a certain role of technology as well. I told you that everything was advancing, not just the population, not just a few other things, but the technology as well, right? So colonization stimulated new improvements in transport, faster railways, larger ships. So you know that the industrial revolution that was on the go in the 19th century, right? It was thriving more vigorously. Newer methods of manufacture, newer methods of preservation were being, discovered one by one, right? So what happened that earlier, if okay, people used to eat meat, right? So earlier, when exotic cattle breeds were being exported from one country to another, those cattle, they were being shipped live. Okay, means if you had to have some meat of American cows, some certain breed of animals that was there in America, and you had to eat that in Europe and England, so you had to export those cattle live from America to Europe, and that was obviously being done via railways, via ships, etc. Okay, so but this was very disadvantageous, because this could often lead to suffocation of those live cattle, could lead to exposure of those live cattle on the way of being transported, right? So this was going on till the 1870s. Okay, after this, a certain new technological advancement was there, which was known as the refrigerated ship. Okay, so this refrigerated ship, this allowed these animals, these cattle, exotic cattle, to be slaughtered there in that exotic place. So for here in this example, the exotic place is America, right? So those cattle, they were being now slaughtered in America itself, and then that perishable, that live meat, okay, that meat that you had just been cut off from the live animals, that was then being transported to Europe, to England, via this refrigerated ship. Okay, so this enabled, this role of technology, it basically made certain processes hassle free. So now you did not have to wait for those animals to be, transported from one place to another. You did not have to constantly, pester yourself about their hygiene, their cleanliness, or their whether they have eaten or not. Rather, you could just get rid of them in the first place, and you can just transport that meat product that you get from those animals from one part of the world to another. Okay, so this significantly enabled the meat trade. Okay. Then, late 19th century colonialism. Of course, I told you in the plantation and the slave trade sector that Africans, they were being exported from their native land, from Africa, and they were being exported as cheap labor, or they were being exported as slaves. Okay, means they had no rights of their own, though no human rights of their own. They were just you can say like how people used to use, or they still use, cattle in order to in order to plow the fields, plow the lands, all right, or how they use donkeys in order to in donkeys as beasts of burden, right, to for carrying heavy places from one part of say one part of an area to another, right? So now you had live human beings doing all those work for you, and those were the African slaves. So you can see here in this map that how important European powers, they met in Berlin in 1885 to complete the carving up of America between them. Means in 1885, all those rich, all those politically and wealthy countries of Europe, they met together and they divided African lands between them. Okay, so you can see here, like, there's French West Africa, there's French Equatorial Africa, there's Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, or you have here British East Africa. So they were basically dividing those area between them, amongst them. Okay, so you can take this part, I'll take this part. So they were colonizing them. Okay, France, Belgium, England, they all started colonizing. And the US was also not behind. The US also took over some colonies held by Spain in the late 1890s. So I told you, right, that the USA was able to sustain itself as a separate economy of its own, separate from Europe, separate from England, right, and of course Europe. So USA also came forward, and the main, you can say, the main country that was responsible for this plantation and this slave trade was the USA. So after it started gaining its prominence in the during the late 1890s, it started picking up slaves from Africa, and it started, it started transporting these slaves from Africa to Northern America for their cheap labor. Okay. Sir Henry Morton Stanley in Central Africa. So there was this person, Sir Henry Morton Stanley, that was responsible for, you can say, the geographical mapping of Africa. So what this person he did, he was a journalist from the New York Herald, who led the explorations that helped the conquest of Africa. So what he did was, when he was in the African land, you can see here he's with an African child. The African child has an axe or something like that, an agricultural equipment, and he's carrying a gun. So he started gunning down people, and he started taking the help of locals in order to map the area of Africa. Okay, so this cartography means the mapping of a certain geographical landscape that was of course being done by humans, and that was being done by exploration, that was being done by discovery of new land areas, right? So with the help of locals, he started mapping the area of Africa. He started he started discovering important places where he could get certain land resources, or where he could easily lead his army in order to conquer those land, not just those land, but also the people living on those lands. And he could then either export them as slaves, or he could also lead a sort of a missionary, a religious exchange, right? So whatever these tribals, these African tribals, they were propagating their faith as, they could then get rid of that, and Christianity could take place. So with the spread of Christianity, that could also be a major factor, that how these people could then be transported easily. Because if you started gaining the help, if you started gaining the faith of different people that you haven't met ever in your life, so that small exchange of, you can say, confidence, it builds a certain rapport between two kinds of people. And when you gain the faith of the other people, and if you want to conquer them, then you can easily conquer them, right? So this is the kind of expedition that certain people like Sir Henry Morton Stanley, he was doing in Central Africa in order to not just annex land but also annex people. Then the rinderpest or the cattle plague. So the rinderpest or the cattle plague is a disease that was that the cattle was vulnerable to. Okay, and this was carried by infected cattle imported by the British to the African land. So in the African lands, there were mostly tribal peoples. Tribal by these words tribal people, I mean that their people used to farm land, means their people used to cultivate. Okay, and whatever faith, whatever god they used to believe in, they used to worship those gods in their different ways. So they had the different ways of livelihood. They had, you can say, their peace. Whatever their way of propagation was, whatever their way of dealing was, that was their own. There was no supervision over them. There was no authority over them guiding them that you have to give some tariff or you have to do this, you have to do that. They were independent beings. All right. So when the Britishers, or the example that you had seen in the previous slide, Sir Henry Stanley, so when people like him, they started annexing those African lands. So of course, first, if you just go and say that I want you to work for me, then the people, of course, they would deny. They would even they would even drive away those men. All right, but those men were armed. Those men had guns with them, the Englishmen, and these poor tribals, they had nothing with them to save themselves. Right. So what happened was, in order to get rid of their livelihood, the Britishers, they started introducing certain diseases, right? I told you about that a technique that the disease could also be used as a mode of, you can say, a mode of conquest, right? So they started not infecting the African people, but they started infecting the cattle. Okay, so the infected, the cattle that were being imported from British to these American African lands, they were diseased, a disease known as rinderpest. Okay, so when these diseased cattle were being introduced to the African lands, they started spreading this disease to the African cattle as well. So if the African cattle, they got exposed to these infectious and these deadly diseases, then of course they would die, and of course there could be no farm or cultivation, because until and unless the industrial revolution in the agricultural area, it was spread to the whole of the world, people solely were dependent on cattle for their farming, right? So if they did not have these cattle, then how could they transport important goods? How could they cultivate, right? Nothing could be done. So these rinderpests destroyed African livelihoods, creating European monopoly over resources. So now Europeans, they had a complete say, they had a complete control over all these areas, over all these people. And then after, you know, making those cattle vulnerable to this plague, they could annex those lands, they could annex those people, and then they could export them for their own trade, for their own plantation purposes. So you can see here that before rinderpest, African livelihoods were dependent on land and livestock, whereas British imperialists needed labor to exploit them. Okay, so this is what they did. So till now we have learned this introduction, that how this global world was being transformed, how people were there earlier people were used to live in their own confinities, but now people started traveling, people started exploring, and especially this exploration, it reached its zenith in the 19th century. So we'll be discussing about the other parts of the chapter that is going to help us understand about the concept of the global world.